Your success and growth at any company is going to be on the network you build at that company. Easy, but even now, a lot of them are being replaced by machines at speed, right? But the ability to actually build a network, communicate, and solve problems collaboratively, that hasn't changed.
Welcome to Securing the Future podcast with your hosts Jesse Meadors and Ramin Lamei, where we discuss the latest cutting-edge technologies and how they are affecting the security industry. This is the show where industry expertise meets in-depth discussions.
All right, we're back again for another episode of Securing the Future podcast. I'm Jesse Meadors, your host, and Ramin Lamei, my trusty sidekick / co-host. Say hi, Ramin.
What's up, guys?
Really excited today. We've got a very interesting topic. A buddy of mine, Chris Bates, is joining us, former CISO at SentinelOne, and has an incredible background. And really going to be looking at the evolution of the next generation security operations center. It's different today. It is extremely different. And there is a mindset and a shift in how security teams need to be looking at providing the right data, the right context, and the tools are out there now. And it's just being able to properly leverage it and roll it out to your entire team and create a new way of thinking. Chris has really kind of broke the mold on this and really has that formula that I think a lot of security leaders need to hear to kind of help innovate, reduce that alert fatigue that we all know is constantly talked about, right? That goal of one pane of glass is a really key desire for all of you. So Chris, welcome to our show, man. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Anything you wanted to kind of touch on with regard to your background that might be helpful context, and then, dive into our topic today would be great.
Yeah, well, I've been in cybersecurity since 1996. Got my start in building and securing dial-up modems, ISPs, over in Bend, Oregon. Kind of been in it ever since, most recently with SentinelOne. Prior to that, a lot of incident response work, a lot of regulatory work. So, yep, I've done the on-the-road incident response thing many times.
What's your favorite part of security or the role that you've had?
I would say right now, it's actually solving problems. I think what I like more than anything else at the executive level role here is security plays in the gray area so much. It really requires building good relationships and figuring out what is the right way to solve a problem. So build a relationship with the CTO, the chief legal, whatever those are, and just kind of figure out what is the right solution for the company. Because as I said, there's tons of solutions that would mitigate the risk, but what is the right one that everyone can live with? What shade of gray are you going to play in?
You sound like a consultant, just like us now.
I think what would be fun here is let's define the old model for security operations. And Ramin, I think you have a great perspective here, coming up from Blue Team, running a security operations center. Let's kind of dive into that. And then Chris, what is kind of this next generation? What are the innovations that have happened that you saw, especially at that time that you were at SentinelOne, that, it really could be transformational for an organization? So Ramin, I'll give you like 2-3 minutes. Talk us through what you experienced when you were running a SOC.
Yeah, my time as running a SOC was probably about 14 years ago. So starting it and probably up to like 2015-ish, right? So a whole set of different type of tools, different capabilities. During that time, we threw a lot of resources at the different type of tools so that they can become experts at them, they can tune the tools, and then have the monitoring and response capabilities down. Part of the challenges with doing that as well is, there's a disconnect on the business side, right? These people were more experts in the tools versus understanding how a business operates and how to, really understand those use cases and bring them into the capability of the tools. Where I think that was a big different shift. And then we had, way too many tools. I remember at one point, we had for file integrity monitoring, which is something that I hated back then, right? Because the tools didn't really have a good capability. Tools like Tripwire, right? Where you're just getting data and alerts, but, you don't know what's your baseline. You don't know, if this is good, is this bad, right? So you have to kind of have your analysts figure all that out, right? In a vacuum. And then they go and talk to their counterparts in IT to, figure out, is this normal or not, right? So all that takes a significant amount of time. And then there were so many different tools, and just keeping up with the tools and having them successfully be deployed and functioning and working took an entire engineering team the same size as the analysts that were monitoring these tools, right? So, overall, I would say the challenges were, too many tools, too much data coming at us, a lot of, the business side we didn't understand, right? Didn't understand our own applications, didn't know how to monitor our applications. through the lens of these different security use cases. And then we were expecting, tier 1 through tier 4 analysts to kind of piece all that together and find that needle in the haystack so that we can respond to those threats. I'll kind of leave it at that.
That was really helpful. All right, Chris, let's hear your take. Kind of walk us through even just the process that you've now identified and, leveraging a lot of the data tools that are out there, to be able to ingest the amount of data we can today and analyze it. And, even the use of generative AI, kind of walk us through how you see security operations today and where it's going in the future.
Well, I think security has always been a data problem. The real question becomes, how do you actually get value out of the data? So when I was at SentinelOne, we bought a company called Scalar, and we basically moved that into the entire back end of the system. It's a big data platform, so it ingests massive amounts of data. And Tomer, who was my boss, the CEO of the company, asked me to really push this idea of XDR and this idea of really kind of getting it into a replacement for a SIEM. So what would that really look like? How would you do that? And so what we did is we really kind of took a different approach. We looked at what is the issue. And the issue is right now, tons and tons of alerts, almost nothing in context, and you have to try to piece everything together, and it takes a lot of time, and it's just a very inefficient process, right? And so we looked at what are the capabilities of this new data platform. Massive ingest, fairly low cost, the ability to alert on an event stream. So think of it as almost like taking the DevOps approach to running a SaaS service, so continuously monitoring and looking for anomalies as it happens in the stream. So we're doing the same thing from a security standpoint. And then finally, the ability to take some type of automated action based on that alert, right? So with those capabilities, we basically kind of looked at the threat modeling approach. So we started basically having the SOC go out and do threat modeling based on the business. What are we really worried about? Well, worried about identity-based attacks, takeover attacks. Okay, what does that threat model look like? Well, it looks like these things in the Okta logs or these things in these logs. How do I detect those things? Well, I can detect them using these queries on these event streams, right? Okay, what is the automation I want to take after I detect them, right? So a lot of times, the SOC's going to spend a lot of time trying to get all its context together, and especially now, where almost everything is a SaaS-based system, it's almost all user-based, right? And application-based. There's very little IT that goes into it now. So almost all the alerts will come from a user-based context in some way. So the SOC will do a lot of work, but then what they're going to do is they're going to reach out and try to talk to a user to figure out, like, did you knowingly do this? Is it something? Is it normal? Is it abnormal? What's going on? So if you look at that whole thing and that whole context, how do we short circuit that? How do we pivot it on its head? So the first thing was the threat model, which is basically giving context alerts in context to the business. So alert fires, and then the automation sucks in all the other additional underlying context around it and all the additional alerts around it. You can use AI as an example to put all of that in, a human readable format if you want to, right? And then what we can do is we can use automation. I know, let's say Ramin added a second factor, to his Okta account. Well, attackers do that all the time to get persistence. So within a minute of him doing that, the automation is going to ping him and say, hey, did you knowingly do this? And he's going to say yes, or he's not going to respond, or he's going to say no. If he says yes, then that's fine. If he doesn't respond within a certain time frame, we strip it away and he has to redo it. If he says no, then we spin an incident up, because obviously now we have a compromised credential someplace. How did that happen? What else is going on? And even that is automated. So then, Slack channel spins up, Zoom spins up, everyone gets invited, gets a name assigned to it, gets a ticket created for it, everything starts flowing in there. So it's a very automated approach to get to what you're doing. But the key there, I think, is the threat modeling on the business. So everyone understands the context of the business, and then using the power of these tools to bring in additional information to do what we need to do, right? And then the automation behind it.
Wow, that's a very different way of looking at security operations. Like you said, kind of turning it on its head compared to what Ramin just described. You could even probably have lower level analysts in that group that I don't have to be specialists in understanding the tooling, but they really are much better at understanding the business and the context behind everything, right? And talk to us a little bit, how did you do that for organizations and even within SentinelOne to create a totally different culture with your analysts on threat modeling?
It happened over time. We started with, some of the top 2 or 3 analysts who were really good at, understanding that. We had them start the threat modeling approach. We had them actually start creating the alerts and the QA for the alerts. So basically everything we alerted on, you would create what is the logic on the event stream? What is the logic to QA that to make sure that it didn't change and it still works? And then what is the automation that we're going to take when that fires? What is that automation path? And we're going to code that in. When I was at SentinelOne at the time, we used Torque. There's a lot of them out there to do that. But then that becomes its own micro playbook for that specific threat model, that specific threat in that threat model. Then you move on and you move on. And basically, over time, they start seeing the value of that approach, right? Because in the end, it's one alert that automatically enriches everything, has automation around it, and makes their job very easy, versus having to respond, to this one weird alert that, now they got to go do all the research, the ticket. So it really changes how they actually understand things and how they work. So now they can look forward to actually writing something new and doing something new and innovative versus just responding to ticket after ticket after ticket, or alert after alert after alert, right? So I think it really changed their perception, and as they see the value to it, they all bought into it, right? And then you slowly just work it across. It's not a big bang, it's going to take you, months to get there. But once you get there, I think your business is much more secure.
Yeah. The other thing I hear about, of course, all the time on incident response teams is the burnout rate, right? I mean, these analysts get burnt out. And how did you feel this also improved their excitement to go to work every day? Do you feel like it made a difference when they started understanding what they actually were doing and how it affected the business versus just like trying to put everything together in context without having it fully understood?
No, I think it definitely helped them understand that, because a lot of times they'd have to go talk to the business. To understand the threat model, you end up having to go talk to part of the businesses and not actually understand it, right? What does this look like? So they go talk to, DevOps or SASOps or R&D or marketing or whatever whatever we're working on at the time. So it required them to actually have this interaction. I mean, one of the things I tell my team, your success and growth at any company is going to be on the network you build at that company, right? I totally agree. Technical skills are easy, but even now, a lot of them are being replaced by machines at speed, right? But the ability to actually build a network, communicate, and solve problems collaboratively, that hasn't changed. So, I mean, it gets them doing that at a lower level in the SOC, right? So it gives them the ability to see career paths, gives them the ability to just not be I would say an alert jockey. Boom, 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 boom.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about is like when I'm, being on the recruiting and on the advisory side, like I've kind of seen both angles, right? And when you're on the interview process, working with clients, a lot of the biggest things they're looking for really is not just technical ability, but the ability to communicate, the ability to work well in teams and collaborate and build cross relationships. And cybersecurity is all about communication. It's all about having the right information, right? The right data and the context around that data. But then from there, it's how do you communicate that across different business stakeholders, right? I think it's a big part of it.
Well, I think cybersecurity used to be seen as a very black and white issue. It's not. It's a very gray issue in the fact that it's all about mitigating risk, and you have to understand the business context to understand the risk, right? And, I say security plays in shades of gray because, as I said, there's almost no black and white. So the question is, what shade of gray are we willing to play in to mitigate the risk, security risk? But there's also a business risk. As I crank security tighter, I incur more business risk, right? It could be an operational risk. It could be operational friction. It could be, lots of different things. So the question becomes, how do I enable the business to function at speed and velocity and still mitigate the risk? And usually that becomes a guardrail approach, right? So as long as you play within these guardrails, then we're good. And you can run as fast as you need to run. Now, establishing those, that's usually collaboration and, between us and like the CTO or the CIO or, legal, kind of what is that risk profile we want to run in, the guardrails, and then go do it. And we're going to monitor it, of course. But yeah, I think that's the key. And again, that all comes down to, for the most part, people skills, right? And being, what's the best solution? I don't care where it came from, but what's the solution we all agree to that will work? And then let's move forward.
Yeah, because this also addresses the future of cybersecurity when we look at how are we going to fill, what we used to call the talent gap. But I think what's happening is you've got some folks that are going to retire out, and you've got a new group coming in with a totally different landscape when it comes to the tools and technology they have access to and the amount of data that they can go and analyze. And then, kind of this move to you leverage generative AI for certain parts of providing the right amount of context in data so that it's simplified. How do you see that affecting the future as we grow? Like, I feel like there's going to be people who weren't as technical being able to enter into this market that are good communicators, have good people skills, and can provide real value to a team and not have to necessarily be 10, 15 years of experience. What do you think about that?
I would say it's a bad time to be a Splunk engineer.
100%. Yeah.
Not only this is go bottom, but no, I think what you're saying is, for the most part, AI will continue to get better at doing tasks, right? Like,
Right.
as an example, converting a language. It's very good at that. So, like, here's an example. Here's why everyone used to stay on Splunk. I hired a bunch of Splunk engineers. They had this very archaic knowledge of Splunk, and it was very, very hard to translate that into anything else to move data and to move it. So it was very sticky, right? Now, with tools like Cribble, and more importantly, you have tools that like Purple AI and other ones that can actually convert. You give it a Splunk query and you tell it to convert it to a SentinelOne query, and it'll do it for you.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So again, all right. I think what you're going to find is like these old barriers that usually kept technology very sticky, which was based around this type of archaic knowledge around languages or implementation details. That's all going to go away. So I think you're going to be able to migrate from technology platform to technology platform, from technology platform much quicker than you ever could before. So now the question becomes, what makes them sticky? Is the value of the processes? Is it the value of the automation? Is it the value of the context? Those types of things. But I think that's kind of what you're going to see from that standpoint. And from an AI standpoint, it's still going to continue to give context. I mean, it does a couple things really good right now. It gives context. Hey, take this archaic thing and give me the context of it. I'll do that, right? Or convert, a language into, native language into a query, things back and forth. They're working on things like additional, using AI to reverse engineer and do again, it's all about getting context at speed. So again, is it going to be able to do everything a super skilled person can do? And the answer is no. Is it going to be able to do 80 to 90% of what they could do? Fairly soon. So then, do I really need that many people, or do I only need one or two to handle that 10 to 20% it can't do?
Wow. Yeah, that's, kind of exciting and scary for some folks, right? As far as like learning new skills and having to, innovate, I guess, the way you think about security in the future and what your role's going to be. That's, I think constantly going to be an issue. And we're seeing it already in other areas of tech with all the layoffs, right? Like there's certain roles that just don't need to be there anymore. And they're changing. So like we have to also be aware. We've got to constantly learn and stay ahead. And that's one of the reasons we love doing this podcast, right? It's just like hearing from people like you talk about where the future is going, and it helps us to think differently in security. Yeah, you were going to say something. Sorry, Chris.
Well, I mean, they're now, like, going back to, you look like old to now, right? They're now multi-billion-dollar corporations that don't have Active Directory. They don't have data centers. They don't have servers for the most part. It's all SaaS-based stuff. Completely different IT field and completely different security field than what you used to have, right? And I think as it continues to evolve, security in some ways is always the same. It's always about users. It's always about configuration management. It's always about inventory, right? But in the end, those are really data problems, right? And the scale of them just gets bigger. Number one, vulnerability management. But I think number two, one of the things you will see with security is it's very cyclical. So basically, blue speeds up, red speeds up. Blue speeds up, red speeds up. It's just continuing to get fast. The cycles get faster and faster and faster. It's usually what happens there. And so what AI is going to do on both the defender and the attacker side is to speed those cycles up to where eventually you're going to get down to near machine time. And then the only way to respond to a red team at near machine time will be a blue team at near machine time, right? So, I mean, that's kind of what's going. So it's the same basic problem. It's just a different skill set to solve that problem.
And Chris, to your point there, right, as the technology, especially on the defense side, goes there, right? There's got to be more trust in AI to make decisions, right? When do you see that like capability getting to a place where, someone would be willing to trust it? And then, what are your thoughts on will companies trust, blue team to automatically respond to threats?
It depends on what it is, right? In the end, I don't think you're ever going to get a CTO of a major SaaS company to sign off on AI flipping things in his SaaS when he's accountable for uptime. That's never going to happen, right? I do think you'll get to where you could, we would suspend accounts. We would do other things in an automated fashion, right? Depending on what they were, and then we'd have ways to recover them. But I think what you are going to see is, let's just take that CTO experience, right? Maybe I can't automate the resolve of that issue, but I can absolutely automate the spin up of the incident response team and getting everyone into the channel, posting everything into that channel, and actually start the work right away, right? That's what you're going to start seeing, I think, is more of an automated approach of that right there. Because then You get the smart people in the room, they look at the problem, and they start solving the problem, right? And I, as a security guy, I may not even know how to solve that problem in a SaaS, right? So I think that's one of the things that security needs to be very careful of, right? I don't flip bits in IT for the most part. I don't flip bits in the cloud because I'm not accountable for uptime in the cloud. I'm not accountable for configuration in the cloud. I'm not accountable for uptime in the IT environment, more configuration, right? So I don't want to be taking these systems down when someone else is accountable. What I want to do is point out what I think the issue is, get the other people that own that to start solving that issue as quickly as possible. So I need a very good incident response process, almost near real-time incident response process. Who's the guy on call that's going to get invited to the Slack channel via PagerDuty that's going to start working that problem within, a couple minutes of that going off, right?
And I think that's been a lot of the challenge for legacy as well, right? So, back in the time when I was running a blue team, if an issue popped up, we're spending, X amount of time just piecing together the picture, figuring out, who we need to reach out to, how to get them engaged, where are they, right? And all that burns up very valuable time.
We took a different approach to SentinelOne. We basically had a standardized incident response process across the entire company. So the incident response process for SaaSOps was the same for security as was the same for everyone. And when we had an incident, everyone got invited to the channel. And then once we verified it wasn't your problem, we let you go, right? But that way you will start working on it right away, trying to solve it. So you're not spending all the time trying to figure out who does what, who does this. Hey, we have this alert. It's in this, Kubernetes cluster in this environment. Now SaaSOps is already working on figure that out. And then as they find stuff, security's working to figure out, is it other security things, and it rolls. So I think that's also this idea of need to know. In a lot of, I think I can kind of understand it from a liability standpoint, but in the end, it really slows down response. And if your job is to keep the attacker out of your SaaS or whatever, like SentinelOne as an example, has root access to 30, 40 million endpoints. So my biggest concern is keeping people out of my SaaS environment so they don't come into your environment as quickly as possible.
Do you feel that, that kind of investment that obviously SentinelOne makes in security is probably going to be different than, let's say, a fintech company that has a SaaS offering? Do you think, the way you've described, how you've managed a security program and operations, do you think that model is today, reasonable to have at a fintech company that's, the appropriate size, right? Something medium or large?
I do, to a certain extent, because in the end, these things are built around platforms that they have to have, right? I guarantee that fintech company is implementing a CrowdStrike, a SentinelOne, a Palo, or a Microsoft for their EDR. All those are XDR. All those support the same capabilities that we said, right? And so if that's the case, maybe I don't threat model everything in my environment, but what are the true things I worry about? Let's ingest those logs at scale because it's pretty much dirt cheap on those platforms. Let's write the alerts, and then let's start working through that program. I think that's what's going to be so disruptive. I think it's even going to be disruptive to like Databricks and Snowflake and other types of companies, because the data platforms that these other companies are using, like the four major XDR players, are for the most part pretty feature rich and will continue to extend there into the data space, which is what that problem is. So
it's interesting because, to your point, the examples you're bringing up are, those are more data management platforms, and they're trying to add security use cases versus, SentinelOne or CrowdStrike, where these are more security companies that have been adding the data capability in the back end, right? So they're going in this similar direction, but two different kind of approaches.
I think if you look at what SentinelOne did, is it basically realized the EDR problem and the XDR problem was a big data problem. So what they did is they went out and they actually bought a big data technology, Scalar. Steve Newman, the guy who created Google Docs, made it. And they put that as the backbone. All data is stored in that one area. It's all there in one system, easy to reference, easy to use. And once they did that, you can start using it for lots of security use cases, what we use it for. There's also people that use it for SaaSOps use cases. You can dump all your Kubernetes logs in there. You can dump all your other logs in there. The language is easy to do. It's easy to use, right? So I think what you're seeing is the convergence, and this is why we see a lot of convergence in the industry, right? Is that almost all these problems are data problems that we're trying to solve. It's just how much data do we have? Now, if I can store all of that data in a single place, like a CrowdStrike or a SentinelOne, then what happens is I just start creating products. And every new product I create, every new module I create, adds additional value across all the other modules. It becomes very hard to really break that model right now until they stop innovating. And so I think that's why you're seeing this massive consolidation in to that single data plane, because I can tell amazing stories and correlations if I have everything in one place. And I think the other vendors have a massive advantage that way, because probably half of the data volume, 30 to 40% of the data volume at least, is going to be the EDR data trail. It's that massive. So,
well, we are at the end of our time. This was a really interesting conversation, Chris. Thank you so much for taking some of your time out of your day and joining us. We really appreciate your insights. They are really transformational. And I really hope this helps a lot of the, leaders out there, security leaders that are going to watch this and maybe have some new ideas to innovate as things continue to change and to evolve. So thanks so much for sharing your perspective. We really appreciate you joining us on the show.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks, Ramin. You guys have a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye, all.